Keith Haring walked the thin line between indulgence and restraint. In the 1980s, New York City's vibrant art scene flowed freely with creativity and plenty of drugs. And while his environment may have tempted him with a variety of drugs, Haring avoided the destructive path of addiction. Instead, he remained focused on amplifying his positive message through art. He was all about being creative and loving people and being unapologetically himself, and being a rebel along the way. Keith Haring was born on May 4th, 1958, in the small town of Reading, Pennsylvania. His parents were known to be strict, so he was expected to behave and attend church. And if you've grown up with strict parents yourself, you know that sometimes that can produce, at worst, a rebellious menace, or at best, a really sneaky kid. And as a teenager, his curiosity for life began manifesting as a religious fan of the evangelical Jesus movement, and later as a stereotypical hippie. He abandoned the conventional lifestyle of his hometown for drugs and the counterculture of the Grateful Dead. Keith Haring embarked on a journey across America, hitchhiking his way from coast to coast. And even in his youth, Haring displayed artistic potential. On these road trip journeys, he would create t-shirts adorned with anti-Nixon slogans and artwork inspired by the Deadhead movement. Keith's father, Alan Haring, was an amateur cartoonist and one of his artistic influences. So we see art show up early on in his life. In 1978, at the age of 20, he moved to New York City. The decision came about after he started realizing he was gay. At the time, he had a girlfriend, and she was pregnant. The news freaked him out because, for one, he realized he did not want to be in a heterosexual relationship, and two, he didn't want to be a parent or stay in the same state he was born and grew up in. In an interview with Rolling Stone magazine, he says, "I was in the position of having to get married and be a father or making a break. One thing I knew for sure, I didn't want to stay there and be a Pittsburgh artist and married with a family. I decided to make a major break. New York was the only place to go." I am curious about who the girlfriend was and if she was okay afterward. Did she have the baby? I'm guessing probably not. No one has ever come out since claiming to be Keith's kid, I don't think. But we can't be too sure based on just that. Did he leave her some cash for an abortion? Maybe she miscarried? I couldn't find any other information about her. Might you know anything about Keith Haring's last female partner and a possible child? I have so many questions about that, and I know I'm getting hung up on this detail, and I digress. This is about Keith Haring and drugs. For Keith Haring, drugs were a way to rebel and escape. In those days and into the early 2000s and beyond, Just Say No to Drugs and other such campaigns were all over television and in schools, but for a teenage Haring, they just made him want to try drugs even more. Keith shares about his youth. "When I made the decision to be an artist, I began doing these completely abstract things that were as far away from cartooning as you could go. It was around that time that I was taking hallucinogens. When I was 16 or so, psychedelic shapes would come like automatic drawings, come out of my consciousness. The drawings were abstract, but you'd see things in them." And looking at his body of work now, you really do see an element of psychedelia in the way things free flow around each other and sort of morph into different things. So I can see that. Drugs showed him a whole new world. Growing up with strict parents probably added to his naturally rebellious nature. He'd act out in ways like coming home stoned, stealing liquor, getting arrested, and even making and selling angel dust, aka PCP, with his friends. That seems like kind of hardcore. After his move to New York and his newfound sexual identity, he fully adopted the nightclub lifestyle, particularly the avant-garde and gay clubs that celebrated queer culture. You could often find him at Club 57, which was the opposing counterpart to the glitzy Studio 54 that everybody knows about. Haring partied just as hard as he painted. He became a fixture at Club 57, where he organized shows and made creative connections with fellow artists like Kenny Scharf and Jean-Michel Basquiat. You could find Haring at the gay bathhouses, the Anvil, which was an S&M sex club, the Mud Club, Paradise Garage, which was called a big gay disco, and other places around the city where he could let his colorful, homosexual artist freak flag fly. Sometimes these clubs didn't offer alcohol, sometimes they did. Still, whether they did or not, drugs were always around, particularly the crowd favorite, cocaine. Gatekeeping art was a huge turnoff for Haring. His goal was not to end up in galleries, although that ultimately happened here and there anyway. He saw success as showing his art to as many people as possible, and to be relatable and accessible. He wanted to meet the average person where they were, so naturally he took to the streets. He started drawing on subway walls. Empty black ad paper became filled with symbols and line drawings. At first, some people didn't get it. Other graffiti writers were suspicious of him, but he was persistent and was making art on the street practically every day. So he earned his place and their respect. His visual language was unique because it was so simple. His iconography distilled down ideas in a super easy to consume way. His figures were free from race and gender and other identifying qualities. They were just human or animal. With music blasting in the background, Haring would free flow his way into a finished painting or chalk drawing in a matter of minutes. No planning, no sketching, just pure flow. His work was rhythmic and active. In many interviews with him, he's working as he's talking, multitasking on his creation and a conversation with a microphone at the same time. It gave his work a performance art element to it. Keith Haring viewed art as a way of instantly responding to life and a medium for conveying our time's small and significant themes in this frenzied yet rhythmic manner. Things like partying and love, racism, nuclear war, and death. In 1984, he really blew up as a famous artist. By then, he had exhibited alongside Basquiat and Warhol, and he collaborated with choreographer Bill T. Jones and later Vivienne Westwood. Then there were several collaborations with Grace Jones, which were amazing, and a commission from the United Nations. Kind of a big deal. That same year, he was featured on Vanity Fair and Newsweek. It must have been such a whirlwind. I quickly skim over his up-and-coming successful years to illustrate just how busy he was. Art was life, and life was art. The man worked tirelessly every day for years. He was young and energetic and felt he had things to say. Good for him. Hard drugs, clubbing, and being a popular social butterfly were fun and all, but creating art was still at the top of his focus. He was a workaholic. This is not the case for many, but somehow it was in Haring's nature not to let drugs and partying distract from his creative work. He didn't let his overnight fame take away from his core message either. Art was all he wanted to do, and when he was done for the day, once he decided that that last mark made on the canvas was enough, he liked to smoke a bit of cannabis and take a step back. The weed helped him step away from work mode and simply sit with his creation, look at it, think about it, like a sort of meditation. Haring was well versed in the menu of street drugs available to him at the time, but his go-to was still cannabis. I'm not gonna say cannabis is the best drug and not harmful at all. First of all, inhaling any kind of smoke means contaminating the lungs and airways, so there's that. And some percentage of the population actually becomes anxious with the use of cannabis. Or, like in the very rare and extreme example, as it did for a friend of mine growing up when he was about 16, cannabis sends one into a near schizophrenic episode that leads to immense agoraphobia and crippling anxiety for over a year. I kid you not, he was not okay for a long time. But for most, using cannabis leads to bliss. Funny enough, anandamide was the first endocannabinoid molecule to be discovered. It comes from the Sanskrit word ananda, which means bliss, extreme happiness, or one of the highest states of being. With the massive workload that Haring had going on all throughout the 1980s, a relaxing yet non-addictive drug like cannabis was a good choice for him. He could have been on, like, barbiturates. I don't know, maybe he was. Cannabis was the calm, contemplative yin to his workday's busy, active, frenetic yang. As we move through the middle of the 1980s, Haring's name and message only become bolder and louder. Crack cocaine became a big problem in America, but the government and media didn't always handle it well. They blamed the drug for other issues and spread myths about it making things worse for people who were already struggling. The media and politicians framed it in a way that made the use of crack a moral issue. As in, if you're an addict, you're a terrible person and you deserve what you get. In an article by Donna Hartman and Andrew Golub in the Journal of Psychoactive Drugs, they speak about the media's portrayal as armed with a sense of moral superiority. This coverage made it easy to dismiss the disadvantages experienced by the minority urban poor as self-inflicted matters of individual choice and self-indulgence, as opposed to recognizing them as matters of economic history, social structure, and racial inequality. I can agree that it was a bit more complex than simply bad people do bad drugs. Haring's friend and studio assistant became addicted to crack cocaine. Haring also lost many close friends to drug overdoses. Haring observed that many people didn't truly understand what they were getting themselves into. People would smoke crack cocaine casually and then realize they were hopelessly addicted once it was too late. It's a dangerous and damaging drug that causes cognitive impairment, mental health decline, and emotional changes that lead a person to completely wreck their relationships, ambitions, finances, just totally wreck their lives. Overdose can lead to things like seizures, delirium, heart attack, or stroke. Crack is a businessman's drug. It was invented to make someone profit. Smoking pot never made you go poor. And crack is completely different than the mind-expanding drugs like LSD or pot. It's the opposite of mind-expanding. Crack makes you subservient. Instead of opening your mind, it shuts it and makes you dependent on whoever's providing you with a drug. I think crack is even worse than heroin. Heroin calms you and makes you feel sort of unaware. Crack makes you totally schizophrenic, aggressive, and irrationally obsessed with wanting more. So what's an artist to do? A mural, of course. At a humble handball court at the corner of 128th Street and 2nd Avenue in Harlem stands Crack is Wack, a 25-foot wide by 16-foot tall mural completed by Haring in 1986. On one side, it features a snake chasing after a figure with an X on its chest, about to devour it. Several figures below also have X's on their chests, meaning anyone could fall prey to the drug's addictive and damaging ways. The other side of the wall shows this giant skeleton holding a crack pipe and a $0 bill on fire. The drug-addicted death skeleton seems to crowd surf over many other figures, I believe to symbolize how the awful effects of crack cocaine are smothering the population. Both sides say crack is whack in big, bold letters. Everything is done in black, white, and a bright, ultra-saturated orange reminiscent of orange hazard signs. Haring went for the do now and ask for permission later approach with this one. He truly believed in his work and that it would relate well to the people and the youth of Harlem, so he just went for it. Thankfully, the city saw its value and decided to keep it. It would have easily been something the city would have later commissioned him for anyway, so they better keep it. But this is how it ended up happening. Most importantly, the community was a fan of the work too. In the mural, Crack is Wack, no specific races or economic classes are shown, just human figures with no noticeable differences. And the phrase crack is whack focuses on the drug itself, not the people who use it. Haring wanted to encourage the public to think about the dangers of crack without blaming any particular group of people. Over time, the weather and visitors have damaged the mural, but in 2007, the Keith Haring Foundation stepped in to restore it, ensuring it could be enjoyed for years to come. After being diagnosed with AIDS in 1988 when he was only 29 years old, Keith Haring didn't slow down. Instead, he worked even harder, creating art at a faster pace. Knowing that his legacy would live on through his work must have been a consolation to knowing he didn't have much time left. During this time, he painted many pieces depicting sex acts and phallic drawings to draw attention to and raise awareness about HIV and AIDS, another epidemic sweeping the 1980s. His friends say he never complained about being sick. Instead, he was so stoic and continued on with his work. His journal showed he wasn't sure if he had a few months or years left to live. In reality, he had about 2 years. Sadly, he passed away on February 16, 1990, when he was just 31 years old, because of complications from AIDS. After Keith's passing, his friends and fans wanted to remember him, and over 1,000 people gathered at his memorial service at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City. It was a big event to honor his life and art. Back then in the 1990s, doctors didn't have the antiretroviral medicines to treat AIDS like they do now. There weren't many drugs to help control the HIV virus. Modern medicine can reduce the amount of the virus in the body, prolonging a person's life by many years. Today, we still don't have a consistent cure for HIV and AIDS, but there have been a handful of people in the world so far who have been cured of the disease, like actually fully cured. So there is hope for future medicine. Unfortunately, Keith couldn't get the help to fight the disease and prolong his life like people can today. Keith Haring was an artist and activist at heart, and if he were alive today, he would still be advocating for gay rights, HIV and AIDS cure research, drug addiction rehabilitation, and other social issues. I'm sure he would have also been stoked to see what a long way cannabis legalization has come, and the breakthroughs being made today with hallucinogen decriminalization. Perhaps he would have even taken part in the controlled setting or clinical use of mind-expanding drugs like ketamine or ayahuasca that are available today. I think if he were alive today, he would have totally fit into the world of social media and short-form content. His art-making process was a performance in itself, and how he worked so quickly was perfect for the catchy 30 to 60 second platforms we have today. He probably would have loved socializing, sharing, collaborating with other people online. Not only that, but social media is the way to get one's art across to the many, to the whole world. Just like he did back when he first arrived to New York City and spotted an empty black page to draw on at the subway. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed or learned something new, I would love it if you threw a like my way. Until next time, go check out some new art.